This is a short video to show how to measure using the SA Toolkit in SA version 2018 5.1. The first thing you're going to want to do is open up the toolkit. If you haven't got it open, you're going to want to right click on this area up here and hit Toolkit. The area that we're going to be working in today is relationships. It's your second pull out down from the top. This area is where we'll define our template, our toolkit template, and tell it what it is that we want to measure. For my part that I want to measure today, I have a plane and 5 holes. 4 of them form a bolt hole pattern. So I'll tell it that I want to measure a plane. I can give it a name. I'll call it top plane. And then I'm going to measure a big hole. That hole is going to be projected onto the big plane. So I'll tell it that I'll have a plane of projection. So my plane that's created over my tree bar, I'll select that as the plane of projection. It shows up in the projection plane here, and I can tell it I want to measure a big hole. Then I have a middle hole that I want to measure. So we'll click middle hole. That's still projected to the top plane. And I have bolt hole 1 through 4. So I'll tell it that I want to measure 4 holes, all projected to the top plane. If I scroll down to my inspection tab, I see that I have my task list for what it is that I'm going to measure. Now I do have some opportunity to do some things with this with these relationships. For example, I can set the properties. I can tell it how many points I want to measure on each hole. I can tell it that I want to see how flat that plane is. For my holes, I can tell it that I want to. I can give it nominals. I can type in my tolerances if I want to. I can tell it how many holes that I want to measure, or how many points that I want to measure on the hole. Same thing for the middle hole. Maybe I want the middle hole to be measured in the same way the big hole is measured. So I can go back to the properties. I can tell it I want to measure that hole in the same way. And I can tell it what features I want to transfer over. For the bolt hole pattern, I'm going to do a couple of things. I want to tell it that I want to create cardinal points and put those points into a separate group. That's the middle, the center of the hole. So we'll call that group bolt hole cardinal points, and I just want to measure the center point. And we'll click apply to selected relationships, and we'll have all the bolt hole circles measured in the same manner. We'll click on OK. Now maybe I want to do a couple of other things, maybe get some dimensions. So maybe I want to know the dimensions between each of the holes in the bolt hole pattern. Now I'll have a group of points for my cardinal points, and I'll tell it I want to know the distance from 1 to 2. And I want to know the distance from 2 to 3, and from 3 to 4, and from 4 to 1. So as soon as those holes will get measured, I will have that dimension created. Also, maybe I want to know the diameter of the bolt hole pattern. So I'll click bolt hole pattern in my relationship, click on the circle, go back to my inspection tab, and I can say that I want to associate a group of points, which is the bolt hole pattern. And as soon as I have these holes measured, I will have this bolt hole pattern. Now this is something that's created. It's not something that you're going to add measurements to, so you can lock out trapping to that circle so it doesn't show up in your task list. Now if I had an instrument hooked up right now, I would simply double click on the top plane and I would start measuring, and it would tell me to go ahead and measure 0.06. As I do not have an instrument hooked up, I'm just going to associate some points. So I do have some points already created. So I'm going to show the points that I have. So I'm going to click on, actually what we're going to do first is we're going to make a report. So we'll add an SA report, and we'll just bring over the things that we want to put into the report. And and the bolt hole pattern. So I've got my 5 things that I actually want to report, and maybe I do want to report my dimensions as well. So I've got my report created. Now I just have to associate the data. Since I don't have an instrument hooked up, I'll say associate data, and we'll associate a group of points with the top plane. My plane is now created. You can see a check mark next to the plane. I'll associate points with the hole. So I'll click associate data, and we'll select a group of points, which will be the large hole. You can see that the colors of those points change color as they're selected. So I'll right click, I'll say associate data, a group of points for the middle hole, and then I will do each one of the bolt hole pattern. So I can select them from the tree, or I can select them from the group of points themselves. So now I've got all my dimensions created. I've got my bolt hole pattern created. I can click on any of those things. I can see the information about each one of those relationships, and my report has been created. So if I click on my report, I have all my measured values into my report. That's a short video on how to use the toolkit in Spatial Analyzer.